What is up, everybody? This is Sam Couch from Geoscape Photography, and welcome to the Heart of Adventure podcast, where today I am interviewing two PLU alumni who are outdoor photographers. One of them is Danielle Lisk, and the other is Katie McGregor. So we're going to go ahead and start this interview off. Danielle, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
I'm Danielle. I recently just graduated from PLU with my bachelor's in history and political science. And right now I'm just kind of taking a break, just living my life, taking this summer before applying to grad school. My goal is to get my master's in ed and my teaching certification soon and become a high school history or social studies teacher. So that's kind of what I'm doing right now. And honestly, I've taken this summer off just so I can go on more trips and do cool things before I start like real working life. So I guess it's kind of how adventure has played into what I'm doing right now. Yeah.
I think that's great. I think, and especially with, something like being able to teach social studies, I think that that's such an important aspect for people to learn, but being able to tie in adventure to a class subject like social studies, I think is so important. And I feel like it's so applicable too. And, you'll be able to talk about all of the different things that you've seen on your adventures, all the different cultures you've witnessed on your adventures, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that that's really going to tie in nicely.
Thank you. I didn't give it much thought, but it makes a lot of sense the way you put it.
Well, that's good. All right, Katie, go ahead.
Hey, I'm Katie. I also just graduated from PLU with degrees in communication with a focus on film and media studies, and then also a degree in studio art. Currently, I'm also taking the summer off. Options have been really limited with everything going on with the pandemic. So I've also kind of been taking time to travel because, when else are we really going to get a chance like this in our lives where there's nothing else to do? But in my future, I'd like to work more in communication and media. I do a lot of art, photography, painting, and I want to work on the multimedia side of things, maybe in marketing and advertising. But I want to find a way to work the outdoors and advocacy into that type of thing. I found that a lot of my PLU projects in the communication department kind of centered on the unknown things of the outdoors, the things that we should know how to take care of them, and travel in general. So that's kind of what I want to do in the future. Right now I'm just kind of taking advantage of the time to travel and adventure.
Great. I love that. I think that that's sort of the common theme right now, is it's hard to work this summer. And I think that, and Danielle, you might have mentioned this a little bit too, but taking the summer off before you sort of start that actual career, where you might be forced to have the 9-to-5 or graduate school or something like that, actually taking the time to breathe and adventure, I think is so important for not only the mind and the body, but for the soul as well. It's sort of rejuvenating, and I think it can help recharge that body battery that's essential for work, especially when those work weeks get really tough. But you guys both brought up, it's challenging for certain aspects to maybe even adventure during this pandemic. How has this pandemic sort of impacted the way that you have adventured, if at all?
It's made me, in particular, a little bit more cautious with where I choose to go. I don't want to go to like a high risk area, put myself at risk. And it's changed like what I bring with me. I bring my mask, I bring hand sanitizer. I don't know. I make sure we make pit stops where we can, if we're on a road trip, where we can wash our hands. And we try to limit contacts with people as much as possible. It's just thinking about things differently, in my opinion, for me.
I would agree with that. I know we've gone on some trips together and we've kind of brought different things, the sanitization stuff, masks. And I've always enjoyed going places that are less traveled anyway. But now I'm very conscious about where I choose to go. I find it more enjoyable in the first place, but now especially, I think it's important to be very specific about your travel plans, and also work in stops where you can actually get the things you need, because so many things are closed or have different hours. It's just been very a time to be intentional about how you travel.
I love that. I think that, you guys definitely had the answer, which is sort of the same way that I work on my travel adventures as well. We're definitely going to places where people are not going to be as abundant. A trip to the Sawtooth, I'm living in Idaho right now, and a trip to the Sawtooth, while amazing, would be chaotic because during the summer, the Sawtooths are just absolutely slammed with people. And you two are both living in Washington, correct?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm sure places in Mount Rainier National Park or the Olympic Peninsula are just slammed with people. But after looking at some of your adventures on Instagram and seeing the photos from there, it looks like you guys have definitely taken advantage of those places that aren't necessarily in those adventure guidebooks. And from personal experience, I think that is always super fun. And I think that it's always more enjoyable because the stories from those adventures are more unique. You can actually talk about something that is not on the cover of a magazine, and it could still be something as iconic or as special to the individual. The next thing I'd like to ask is, when did you two start adventuring together? When did that become like a niche for you two? I've noticed that you guys did, I think it was a big spring break trip from your Instagram stories and stuff like that. So when did that sort of begin in your PLU career?
Well, we became friends through a study abroad program. We did Greece 2019 during J-term, and that's where we met and talked about interests, and we found out we were both into hiking and photography. And like when we came back to America, we just kept hanging out. I think we started climbing together indoors at a bouldering gym called Climb Tacoma shortly after that. And then hiking season started in summer, and we were like, hey, are you free? I was like, yeah. And then we just started going on trips together.
Yeah, I'd say pretty much the same thing. We actually lived together on our study abroad trip. So we spent a lot of time together. Our first kind of bond of friendship was through adventure and traveling. And that was kind of cool. We kind of had this moment towards the end of our trip where we were seriously talking about truly hanging out and staying in touch when we got back to the States. So when we came back, I think our first trip together actually was at the very beginning of summer in late June. And we actually went on a backpacking trip. So 3 days together in the wilderness. Not normally how I do it with someone that I'd never really been hiking with before, but it worked out really great. And we found that we work really well together. When trips are hard, when you're out there for a few days with no one else to talk to. So it was a pretty fun experience.
That's awesome. And I love to, because one of PLU's plugs is to actually use their study abroad programs. And PLU has such a wide variety of different study abroad programs. So I think it's awesome that you two met on one of those programs, and in Greece of all places. I'm sure that trip was absolutely gorgeous and amazing. Was that a history trip?
Religion.
Oh, great. Yeah. So actually, do you guys want to dive in a little bit about that trip and maybe even how that trip sort of made you both realize how adventure has played a role in your life through, traveling to different countries? I don't know how many different countries you guys have been to, but I know the different countries that I've been to, one of them is Iceland, and Iceland holds a super special section of my heart just because I really learned so many different things, not only in terms of geology, but in terms of adventure in Iceland and just how different their kinds of adventures are. There are people that are surfing in Iceland in the dead of winter. And that's absolutely incredible to me, just because that water is freezing. It's rough. It's constantly windy, lots and lots of snow in the winter. But it really did shape, I have such a better appreciation for what other people do around the world. So could maybe you both elaborate a little bit on your Greece adventure and how your sort of term of adventure has played into that?
That was my second time leaving the country. And my first time leaving the country was England. And I went with the PLU women's soccer team the summer prior to that trip. And honestly, Greece was beautiful. The landscape was like something I'd never seen before. I miss it a lot. Just the way people live their lives over there, especially the way people think about food and eat food, is way different over there than it is here. People are a lot more like health conscious. And that's something I really thought about and tried to bring back with me when that trip ended. And that's what really sticks out to me about that trip. also we visited all of these just ancient places older than dirt.
Yeah.
It was surreal, especially visiting Delphi, which is a very sacred place. We also learned a lot about sacred spaces, and a lot of the sacred spaces were like in beautiful landscapes. So the connection between like nature and these sacred spaces was very clear. And so that's something when I go on other trips, and I visit a beautiful landscape, I'm like, oh, this is sacred. So that's something I've really taken with me as well.
That's great.
Yeah, I think I would definitely agree with the sacred spaces concept. I kind of already had a non-educational standpoint on that when I would go out in these beautiful, amazing places. But I think that trip really gave me a better understanding of what places like that can mean and how it can be either on a cultural, personal level. Yeah, that trip was really amazing. It was also my first time truly out of the country. I'd been to Canada. I don't count that. So, my big thing going to PLU was taking advantage of the study abroad program. That's a huge reason why I went to the school. I think going halfway around the world in that sort of setting where you get the education aspect and then also the enjoyment aspect, because our professor was really great about the way he set up the class, where we did a lot of the essay writing and a lot of the homework ahead of time. So once we got to the country, we could then capitalize on everything we learned and really just enjoy the beauty of Greece. I know that our small group in our apartment spent a lot of time together. And so we also kind of made it a mission over there to not only see the places that were advertised in brochures, the Parthenon, all the iconic spots. We also would just spend days and we would end up walking like 12 miles around Athens all day and find the coolest little spots that we never would have found otherwise. So I think that that trip was kind of a combination of things that we already practiced in our different types of adventures at home. And then we also picked up on these new aspects of things that maybe we hadn't considered because it's totally different when you go to another country. Yeah, that trip's always going to be very special to me.
That's great. And I like how you brought up the point too, that the professor had you do a lot of the work front loaded before you left the United States. That way you are allowed time to actually enjoy everything Greece has to offer. I mean, because I'm sure if you went there and you were just stuck in an apartment doing homework the entire time, you couldn't get to understand, like Danielle mentioned, the food culture, or Katie, like you mentioned, the sacred spaces. I think that is such an important part of travel. And I think sharing those stories, so I really appreciate you guys sharing about that, but sharing those stories is so important because I've seen so many different things on vacation where people just go to a different country to never leave their hotel room. And I think that can really miss the point sometimes, because when you travel, there are so many things to enjoy besides just a new hotel room, for example. So yeah, that was really cool. So thinking about that big adventure and even the other small adventures that you've had stateside in Canada, Danielle, you mentioned London as well. You can even bring up examples from that. And I want you to each give me your definition of adventure.
So yeah, thinking about all the cool things and places I've gotten to go and the adventures I've had, this is a little cheesy, but I truly believe that it's about the people. I don't think I've ever told Danielle this, but she's like the person that I wanted to meet going into PLU. Going in, I had friends from high school. It's not like I didn't have any friends, but I found that even growing up in a rural community or on like very near nature where we have a lot of access to forests and trails, we don't necessarily have a big outdoor adventure community around here. So it was kind of hard to find people to connect with and do that kind of stuff with. And so going into PLU, I really wanted to find, at least one friend that was into that kind of thing. So finding Danielle in Greece was super cool for me, at least. I think that when I think about my past adventures, I remember the places are super cool, but I always remember the people. And this is a little silly, but I remember the bad experiences, honestly.
That's great.
Danielle and I actually just went on a trip to the Alvord Desert, and I am never going to forget that trip. Everything went wrong. I mean, we still had a good time. And largely that's because I enjoy her company. Otherwise, I probably would have been miserable. But the people make the adventure. I always remember the mishaps, but I don't remember them through, like a bad lens. I always think about them fondly. I'm a very nostalgic person. And, every summer, especially when my kind of adventure partners change, depending on who's around me and schedules, I always think about the people that I've gone places with in the past. I think adventure is about getting out of your comfort zone and doing the things that maybe you never thought you could, and doing it with the right people, because that's truly what makes the experience enjoyable and memorable. And that's what makes adventure special for everyone, I think.
That was a fantastic answer. And I love asking this question. And I ask this question to every person I interview because I always get something different. I've talked with people who solo adventure, so they would not agree with the standpoint of people, but I love the people aspect that you brought up. And I think it's great how you look at those, stories that other people might potentially find as negative, as you don't put a bad lens on them. I think that that's great, and I know that some of the best stories that people tell in their lives are of mistakes that happen or of moments where everything is not ideal. And I think that that's awesome. I'll definitely want to hear about your guys' trip to the Alvord Desert here in a little bit after we get Danielle's answer, just because that desert is phenomenal. I went camping out there with my fiance, and the night sky photography that you can catch out there, because it's a dark zone, is truly magnificent. So I'm excited to hear about that in a little bit. Great answer. All right, Danielle, do you have your answer yet?
Mine's a little bit more simple. Katie, you touched my heart, by the way. That was so sweet, what you said about looking for someone like me and finding one at PLU, and it was me. That is just the sweetest thing. Honestly, I didn't think I'd ever find another person who was with the same ideas of adventure going into it, because a lot of people like hiking, but in a different way than we do. And yeah, anyways, so adventure. I really think for me, it's more about going places I've never been and seeing things I've never seen and getting a cool story out of it. Or not even a cool story, but just a story in general for me. I do agree with the people aspects, but I also enjoy solo stuff. I went to Ireland by myself in January, and that was just phenomenal. Even though I was alone and it was a little scary, I don't think I would have done it any other way. But there's definitely something about having shared experiences with someone else. So yeah, I would just say it's about going places I've never been and seeing things I've never seen and getting a cool story out of it.
I love that. Experiencing the new is so important. And actually, I think that's a really cool thing to touch up on, if you don't mind. What was it like traveling in Ireland by yourself? And you said that was the first time you went to Ireland, or that you've been to Ireland, correct?
Yeah, I had never been before.
That's incredible. And, regardless of how long you stayed, the fact that, you were able to do it by yourself and you felt comfortable. I mean, there's places in the world that I would love to travel, but I'm a person that loves to have someone by my side when I travel. I love to have that person to experience, essentially everything on the adventure with. But I'd love it if you would dive into a little bit of detail about that trip on your own. And if you'd like to, even use that to help motivate other people, other women who want to travel solo, and why that is something that they should totally embark if they feel comfortable. I'm excited to hear about this.
It is scary, especially being a woman on my own. I found myself really having to be alert with my surroundings, and I made sure to wear shoes I could run in every day if need. And yeah, it impacted what I packed, because I wore things that I could move in if I had to. So it was weird the way I thought about what I packed because of my safety. But honestly, I did a lot of research beforehand on cities that are safer to go to and crime rates and stuff. And Dublin is one of the safest cities you can go to. The crime rate is very, very low. Ireland in general has a fairly low crime rate. There's little seaside villages that they've never had a police force because there's never been crime.
Wow.
Yeah, right? I did a couple of guided tours. I think if I was with someone, I would have rented a car and explored the island. But because I was alone, I felt like it would be safer and easier for me to do a couple of guided tours to see the whole country. So I did a tour to the Cliffs of Moher, and then a tour up to Northern Ireland to Belfast and the Giant's Causeway. So I think that would have been different if I was with other people. But yeah, Dublin, I went there mostly for the nightlife. So out on the streets alone at night as a woman, that was terrifying. But I never once felt unsafe, like genuinely unsafe. I was never followed. I guess I got lucky. But then again, Dublin is just so safe. So it's all about doing research beforehand and just making sure that you're confident being on your own first before you go out there, and wear running shoes, honestly.
I really like that. I think that's really cool. And, I think that it's something too that is making a big change. And it's nice to hear stories like that where you say, I traveled to a different country by myself and I'm a woman, but I did my research first. I really like how you brought that part up. And, those were facts about Ireland that I had no idea, especially those little remote villages that have never had a police force simply because they've never needed one. I think that that's so cool. And nightlife is something that not a lot of people think, oh man, you do not want to be by yourself in the middle of a street, especially in a foreign country at night. But you broke that barrier and you showed that it's doable. And I think that that is absolutely fantastic. And I think that more and more people, especially women, are becoming motivated to do kinds of things like that. And I think that that's great. So yeah, really cool. What inspired you to do that trip on your own?
Honestly, I had J-term break, a little bit of time off, and I was sitting in my J-term class like the first week. And I signed up for this class just because it's a gen ed requirement. So I really had no actual interest in taking it. So I was just bored to death in the back row. And I was Googling flight prices to places, and I found like the cheapest ones. In Ireland, round trip was like $400. And then I did some research, found out it's really safe, and just hit send and went.
I love that. I mean, it's spontaneous. And I definitely remember those gen ed classes where I was daydreaming about traveling the world, but I love that you acted upon it. And I think that's super important for people out there. I think that if you are constantly thinking about a dream and you never get to live up for it, that is one of the hardest things and one of the biggest regrets that you'll have in life. So you can take Danielle's example and just do your research and just do it, because if you can get out there and learn something from it and inspire other people to do things like that, you really truly have nothing to lose. And you're going to gain lifelong memories and impacts on your life that will shape your life for the rest of your life. I think that's great. Katie, so why don't you go ahead and dive into that Alvord Desert adventure? I'm kind of excited to hear about the downfalls that can be looked at as a positive.
So Danielle, I actually learned about the Alvord Desert a few years ago, I think probably through Instagram, but I interned for a magazine, Northwest Travel and Life. So it's a lot of adventure in the Northwest, like Montana, Idaho, Washington, Oregon, Alaska. And one of the articles I got to write was about Steens Mountain. And what I didn't know is that Steens Mountain is the largest fault block mountain in the country. It's like 10 miles long. It's very tall, and it creates a huge rain shadow, which then resulted in the Alvord Desert, which is a dried up lake bed. And it's one of the least visited areas in Oregon. So as everything was coming to a halt in the world, I kind of thought it might be the perfect place to go to get away and, still limit contact and travel safely. So I did what I always do, and I hit Danielle up. So she agreed that we should go down for a few days, and we were planning to go to Alvord Hot Springs. And the really cool thing about the desert, as I'm sure you know, is that you can drive onto it and camp on it.
Yep.
So it's kind of this like middle of nowhere, drive around as fast as you want. A lot of people go out there and they Mad Max and just drive across the desert super fast. It's a weird feeling not having like road lines and just driving wherever you want. So we went down, and it's about a 10-hour drive from my house. So it's very long. It's a whole day. We got there in the evening and we parked on the desert. It had rained earlier that day, but we checked the forecast and it was kind of looking okay. It wasn't supposed to rain because it's one of the driest areas in the Pacific Northwest. It barely rains. Like, I think it gets 7 days of rain a year at most. So it's super dry. The ground is cracked. And so we set up camp for the night, and it was kind of sprinkling. And so we checked the forecast again. It was supposed to stop. It looked fine. Fast forward to 1 a.m. I woke up. It was pouring down rain. So I hopped out of the car and came back with like 5 pounds of clay mud on my shoes. The desert was soaked. I saw other people camping on the desert that were trying to get off of the desert so they wouldn't get stuck, because people will drive RVs out there and they'll get stuck for several days if it rains. So I woke Danielle up and we drove to another campsite that we passed, and it ended up being really beautiful there. But, you know, getting up and driving in the middle of the night at 1 a.m., it was not fun. I was freaked out. I was hydroplaning and sliding around on the desert so much. It felt like driving on ice. So we got to our new campsite, and then the next morning we woke up to the car shaking. And so my first thought is that we're about to die. Someone is outside the car doing something strange. So we wiped down the fogged down windows, and there were baby cows out there. We were camping in a cow pasture, apparently. So we retired from the night before, but then we went to the hot springs, which were amazing. I would highly recommend going to the Alvord hot springs. The owners are very nice, and it's really a cool experience to be out in the open in the middle of nowhere and just relax in this beautifully warm bathtub water. So that was actually probably the most relaxing part of our trip, because after going to Alvord Hot Springs, we decided to go down this gravel road to find more hot springs in the area. And we thought the road looked fine. Like, I know both of us have driven on plenty of like gravel roads throughout all of our adventures. And we've never had problems. So we're driving down and we see people on the side of the road look like they had a popped tire. And we're like, oh, we're glad that's not us. And we got probably within a few miles of the hot springs, and it was raining again. We hit totally bad weather while we were down there. And we get out of the car to check the road ahead of us, make sure that there aren't any big potholes, and come back, and my car is completely tilted to the side. The tire is totally blown out. I don't even know when it happened. But we wouldn't have known if we hadn't got out and were checking the road. So we got back on the main road and luckily found signal. But the issue was that we were 3 to 4 hours from the closest car shop. It could have been more on a donut tire. And as we were trying to change the tire, we had different people come and help us, and found out that my car had custom tires, so we didn't have the right tools. All this stuff happened. We're on the phone with AAA, like off and on. And I know both of us were really stressed because we're in the middle of nowhere. I don't think I've ever been that far out in the middle of nowhere with no idea how or when we're going to get back. Luckily, 1, we had signal, and 2, we were car camping. So all of the stuff we needed to live was in my car. So it wasn't like, oh no, we're going to die out here, but it was really stressful, and it was raining. So it was just, being out in the middle of nowhere, bad weather. It felt like a bad joke, like one of those dramatic scenes you see in a movie where the characters get stranded and everything goes wrong at once. So eventually we did get help. A guy driving by actually had the right tools to help us change the tire, and he was awesome. We are forever grateful to him. So we got back to our first night campsite, and we couldn't drive back down on the desert, which was disappointing. We never got to actually Mad Max out on the playa because we were on a donut tire. And we did eventually get back to a car shop the next day. It was a very long, slow drive. But I think even on the drive back is when we realized that we were really glad to be out there with each other. We were kind of talking about how even in the stressful situations, calling parents, telling them where we are, that we're stranded with a flat tire, and, parents being worried, us being worried, all these calls with AAA, we realized that we both handled it really well and didn't freak out on each other. And I think that's one of the things that kind of comes into play when Danielle and I are on trips together. We're on the same page. We know how things work with each other. And so that way, when we're in a stressful situation, we can look back and look at it fondly, because it really wasn't all that bad. We still had each other. We did get out of there. We weren't in a life-threatening situation. But that trip was just one thing after another. It felt more relaxing to finally get home when we didn't have to think about making it to the next day and how we were going to get home. But I will forever remember that trip. A lot of things happened, from bad weather in what's supposed to be a beautiful, dry place in Oregon to, getting stranded, and to almost getting stranded on the desert. We could have been out there for a few days if I hadn't woken up at the right time. So Alvord Desert is beautiful, but be prepared to be way out in the middle of nowhere with no amenities. It really, I think, changes the way you have to prepare when you're not near anything that can help you if you need help.
Absolutely. And you were right. It did sound sort of like a movie. You were going through things where, you pull up to this desert that gets minimal rain when we went out there, it was nothing. There was not a cloud in the sky, and it was just super, super dry. But like you said, there are those random few days throughout the year where you will get rain. And it's crazy that you guys got to live through one. And that adventure sounds wild. Just the fact that it seemed like everything that could go wrong did. The car tire blew out, and of course it had custom parts. So it wasn't just a typical like tool set that you needed. But I love how you brought it around full circle. And you said that we learned, wow, it was really good that we had each other on that adventure. And it was really cool that we were able to get out of that and still have a good time. And at the same time, it taught you, for the next one, okay, next time we go into a desert area, we have this on our mind and we know how to prepare for it. Danielle, do you have any plugs on that?
I think Katie hit pretty much everything. Yeah, we have like this thing when we go on trips where we're like, oh, this was such a good idea. Like, we're geniuses for coming out here. But every time we've said that, something like goes wrong on our trips. And so I remember Alvord, because we said it a lot on our Utah road trip. We were like, oh, we're geniuses for coming here. And then something would go wrong. We're like, oh, never mind. But I remember in Alvord, we avoided saying that. We were like, no, we can't say it. We're not geniuses. No.
So and that's
went wrong.
So that's the bad luck saying is, oh, we're geniuses for doing this. So I'm so happy we thought of this. That's good to know. I'll have to not say things like that on my next trip, because I feel like there's always something where karma is going to say, not quite. I'm going to make this a little bit more challenging for you. That's great. Good stories. The next thing I kind of want to dive into, I have a couple more deep questions for you guys, just because that's sort of what I'm trying to get at with this podcast. But one of them is, especially during this pandemic, there are so many more people getting outdoors. And in some respect, I think that's super important. One of my degrees from PLU was psychology, so I've studied a lot on how nature impacts the brain. And there's a lot of positive aspects from even just getting outside simply for 30 minutes to take a stroll through the neighborhood. And during this pandemic, when people are either forced to work remotely or are out of a job, people are outside and they're doing things in nature more often. And it's good because it's helping their mental health. It's helping their soulfulness while they're while they're amidst this time in the world where things don't necessarily seem so great. A downside that I know a lot of national parks are seeing, or even state parks are, because they're so highly trafficked, the fact that garbages have been overflowed, campsites are being just absolutely destroyed because people are not camping in the right areas, and so much more. They're seeing still a lot of visitors, so that's causing disturbances to the park. What do you think it is in terms of an adventurer? How can people take responsibility regardless of their quote unquote adventure level or experience to help promote healthier parks and healthier national forests, healthier rivers, et cetera, et cetera?
I think a lot of the people that are getting outside more during this pandemic wouldn't normally be doing this stuff if it wasn't for the pandemic. So I think it's a lot of people who are not educated on Leave No Trace. They aren't educated on how to disperse camp properly. And some might be irresponsible and they don't pack out their garbage. And I think it's just an education issue, if anything. I think just more information needs to be out there and promoted to the public about Leave No Trace and about just preserving the national parks and how to respect the land while using it.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. It's kind of this double-edged sword because I'm all for getting more people out in the outdoors. I totally agree with, the psychological benefits and just general health benefits. And it's fun to go outside. But I know, especially like in Washington, for example, there's a lot of people, especially from the Seattle area and King County in general, they don't normally get to get outside because they have work. And now Mount Rainier National Park, it's busy every summer, but it's completely overrun. And trash is at an all-time high. I was just at Staircase, which is one of the portals into Olympic National Park. And driving in, you go by Lake Cushman, and there was just piles of trash by the dumpsters, not even in the dumpsters. It was everywhere. I know rangers actually just pulled a full couch out of the lake. People took out there. I don't even know how they got it out there. My guess is that they took a couch out in the lake to float on or something, and they couldn't get it back out. But yeah, it's difficult. I think Leave No Trace education is very important, especially if you have a platform. I know Danielle and I are both in this giant Facebook group called Washington Hikers and Climbers. And that's just a lot of hiking discourse, whether it comes to Leave No Trace or people just sharing their adventures. But there's sometimes a lot of drama on that page because people get really upset when a cool photo is posted and the poster doesn't share the location. Like I said, it's a double-edged sword. It's hard because, I want to share where I'm going. And I'll often, if people ask me like where my photos were taken, I'll usually do it through private message. But a lot of people don't even realize, even if they know about Leave No Trace, there's also the aspect of digital Leave No Trace. And that's kind of a newer rule that's been implemented. But yeah, I think education is important. Cleaning up where you can. If I have the ability to and the place to dispose of trash, I will pick up trash on trails. But yeah, it's hard. You want people to spread out, but in order to do that, they have to care enough to do their own research. And so I think there's some people that you'll never really be able to convince when it comes to respecting the outdoors. But I think genuinely a lot of people care and just don't know any better. So it'd be great if there was, a way to have information be more widely spread, even though parks, have signs about all that stuff. I don't really know what the solution is, but I think partly it starts with each individual doing what they can, where they can.
Right. I think both of you brought up some absolutely fantastic points. And I think this has always been a touchy subject. This pandemic, Katie, you said it perfectly. It's a double-edged sword where it's getting more people to be outside, which is great. That is what a lot of the outdoor community is advocating for, which is awesome. We want to make it more accessible, but then we also have to protect it. That blew my mind when you said that they found a sofa in the lake. That to me seems like it would be something that people wouldn't even think to do, but I guess anything is possible. And you're right. Both of you are exactly right. It starts with the individual. It's not just something that we can go and post up at these parks and say, okay, don't litter, Leave No Trace. If it were that easy, that would be awesome. But I think it's the responsibility of the individual to, join these Facebook groups and, promote advocacy that way. And if you see trash, I know whenever I see trash on the trail and it is safe enough to pick up, I will do it and dispose of it properly once I'm done hiking, because I want to keep those trails and I want to keep those areas pretty. I want to keep them nice. I want to keep the earth healthy for as long as we possibly can. And I know there's a ton of other hikers, adventurers, backpackers, especially there's a few areas in the climbing community that, there's beer cans everywhere at walls. And that's super sad, because you get up to these gorgeous rock faces and all you want to see is nature. And then you get there and you're thinking, wow, there's 5 to 6 beer cans that are sitting right at the base that have probably been here now for a couple months. So what do you guys think is the next step for that, for the individuals? Like, what are some things that you would recommend that individuals do when they're out on trail or they're at, a climbing hotspot like Smith Rock?
I think individuals just need to be aware of where they are and that they need to bring out with them whatever they brought with them to the crag or to the trail. They just need to take nothing but photos and leave nothing but footsteps, I think. And people just need to, respect the lands. I feel like a lot of people just have no respect for where they are, what they're doing. And that's why they leave trash. And that's why they dirty these beautiful places. So I think if people just had more respect for where they are and more respect for keeping the land beautiful, not only for just in general, but like for other people, so other people can also see what they're seeing, and future generations can also see what they're seeing, I think it would be a lot less of a problem.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. There are a lot of things you can do on an individual level. And I mean, one of those things is setting a good example. I think there are also situations, I rarely do this, but if a situation calls for it, I think holding people accountable, if it's a safe environment and you feel comfortable talking to a person. I've been on hikes where there's a lot of wildlife in the area. There are some hikes in the Olympics where there are lots of mountain goats. And every summer the babies are around. And so I've been on some of those trails and there are people coming up the trails with music blasting and you can hear them from a quarter mile away. So sometimes it's just, nicely asking someone to turn down the music so it doesn't frighten the animals. But, there's a lot of situations where I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that, especially if I was on a trail by myself. So, it's all situational. I think it also comes down to choosing where you go. We have a beautiful lake in Washington called Kolchak Lake. I'm sure many people know of it. And it's always been popular, but it's really seen an uptick in visitors, especially this year with everyone from Seattle and King County all of a sudden having time to get outside. And it's completely overrun. I know the local rangers they probably still are having a hard time. It's not advertised so much anymore, but they were really having a difficult time maintaining the area and keeping people safe. The cars were parked on each side of the road for so long that emergency vehicles couldn't get through. And Kolchak Lake, it's someplace I wanted to go for years, and it was popular a few years ago, so I thought I'd wait it out and hope that the crowds died down, and it's only gotten worse. So I think part of that is, I'm probably not going to go right now. I would love to. But if I go, I'm going to make sure it's at a time where it's going to be less busy. So I'm not part of the problem. No matter how much I want to go to a specific location, we have, especially in the Pacific Northwest, we have so many other locations that are just as beautiful and they're far less visited. So I think there's a lot that can be done by, simply doing a little bit of research and going someplace that isn't so popular.
Absolutely. And I think that that's important too for keeping as many places accessible for as many people as possible as we can. And I think the most important thing is, in order to keep these places accessible, we have to keep them clean. We have to keep them healthy, especially if for some reason you have to get emergency vehicles in there. I mean, like you said, if the road's blocked and an emergency vehicle can't get in, but someone desperately needs help, well, that's an accessibility issue. And that's something that as many people need to be aware of as possible. So I think that's great. And I like what you both said too, is you have to set an example yourself. If you see someone on trail doing something like blasting their music, generally, if you ask someone, hey, can you turn that down a little bit, given that it's a safe situation that you feel comfortable and safe, 9 times out of 10, they're going to turn their music down and they're going to respect you. And a lot of times too, the people don't even realize, oh my gosh, that music was so loud, I didn't even think about it. And it's putting that in their head, because what that does is, even if it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to change much on the current hike that they're on, maybe it'll change something down the road. And that's what's important, is breaking a bad habit like blasting music on a trail and promoting something like, hey, if we have to play music, if we feel that it is something to enhance our adventure, let's keep it at a level where only we hear it and we're not disturbing other people or other pieces of wildlife around us as well. I think that's really, really important. Awesome. Okay, so one of the last couple questions that I want to ask here is where did your route of adventure begin? Did it begin in your early childhood? Was it something that you really started to witness during college or high school, et cetera, et cetera? And with that route of adventure, in the hobbies that you guys listed to me, like backpacking, hiking, road tripping, photography, how does that route play a major role in all of those hobbies that you have? And how is that going to essentially shape your future of adventure?
So for me, it started when I was a little kid. I was obsessed with survivalist shows. So like Bear Grylls, Survivor Man, Les Stroud. I loved him. There's a show called Dual Survival, and one of the guys on it like didn't wear shoes for 30 years. I just thought he was the coolest. So I was obsessed with those, and like survival guidebooks. I would always check those out from the library. I don't know why I had that like niche interest as a 9-year-old, but I did.
I love it.
Yeah, I just love that stuff. And I think that really translated into my love for backpacking and hiking as an adult, for sure. Because that's like, I don't know, you're out in the wilderness. Backpacking, you're like almost surviving out there. It's not like bushcraft or anything. Like you have your supplies, but I don't know. It's like the safest alternative to surviving in the wilderness alone. Well, not even alone, with someone else too. Yeah, so I think that really drove my passion for hiking and backpacking. But photography really is just, I don't know. I think that more came from my appreciation for nature and just how beautiful some places really are. So I think that's where that came from. And then road tripping is just, I just want to see new places. And one of the easiest ways is to drive there, just grab a friend and go.
That's great. That's awesome. I love that. Yeah. I mean, I think it's always really, it's great to see these new places and experience. And I love the piece that you brought in about photography, just about it. Essentially, I mean, you get to relive that moment again, and you get to see this beauty and show this beauty to others. And I think that is great. And I love the survival show story. I think that is fantastic, especially when you're a young kid. I mean, you think it's so cool to see people, jump out of helicopters and jump out of planes and, have to survive these intense situations. And the survival guidebooks, I mean, they just make you want to pack up and, go live out in nature. And I think that that's great. And I think that backpacking does a lot of that, because like you said, yeah, I mean, you're not living off the land per se, but you're out there. I mean, we have a Garmin InReach, which is essentially a satellite phone. So we could, contact people if we needed to, and we let them know, okay, we made it safely. But when you're out there, it is just you and, maybe the people that you're hiking with, and that is it. And it gives you that frame of mind where you have to think, okay, we have to prepare for numerous situations. What if there is a storm and you're on top of a mountain peak and thunderheads start to roll in? You have to think about, okay, what are we going to do in this situation? Or maybe you planned on, okay, well, we're going to go fishing at this spot. And, so we'll bring a little bit of food, but we are pretty confident that we're going to catch a lot of fish. And then you get there and you don't catch a lot of fish. And I think having that survivalist state of mind, or even watching those shows, reading those books, it does provide that with sort of a sense of fun. And it does give people an opportunity to test themselves, which I think is something that's super important about adventuring. So I love that. That was great.
Yeah, so I'm kind of the opposite of Danielle. I used to hate nature, honestly. Truly, I really did. I have a lot of allergies. And so, being outside would just trigger all of them. And as a kid, it was really bad. I'm also allergic to mosquitoes. So camping was not an option because I would get mosquito bites and my whole leg would swell up and I couldn't walk for the next day.
That's not fun.
Yeah, no, it was nasty. It's gotten better over the years. But I've always loved adventure. Since I didn't like the outdoors as a child, I read a lot of books and I still read a lot of books. And so I think I always had that love of adventure in me. But it wasn't really until high school, I think, that I truly made an effort to go out and go hiking. I know one of the first hikes I did was Vance Creek Bridge, and I don't even know if I'd count that as a hike, and also it's illegal, so don't go there. I was a dumb teenager, but that bridge, if you don't know, it's this railway trestle, and it's like 300 feet long, and it's 342 or something feet high, and it was all over Instagram. And so we went out there, a couple of friends from high school and we went out on the bridge. It was honestly terrifying. I don't necessarily have a fear of heights, but I respect them. And I was shaking on that bridge because there's these huge gaps between rotting wood, and you can see all the way down to the river. I think it's the second highest railway trestle in the United States or something. So that trip was very memorable for me. And I think that partially seeing other people's photos is what kind of woke that sense of adventure in me. I know a few photographers in Washington specifically, like Andrew Kearns, Michael Flugstad, Cameron Lee Anderson, all of them. They were like the OG people that kind of made me realize how beautiful our state is. I've always grown up near Olympic National Park, but hadn't really taken advantage of it until high school. And so photography is a large part of what helped me come to love the outdoors. Now, the majority of my life is shaped around outdoor activity and being outside. Researching and reading about these places is what gets me through those winter days when you can't go outside because the weather's just too nasty or conditions aren't good. So I think that initially it was seeing other people go out and do it, and then finding my own people to go out and do this kind of stuff with. And now I kind of like to dabble in everything. I'm trying to learn kind of as many outdoor recreation activities as possible, so I have something to do year round, whether it be, just hiking or backpacking, or I've been biking a lot lately, mostly road biking, but just, another form of transportation, another way to get out and enjoy the beauty of what's around us. Same with like climbing and skiing, which I'm not good at, but I like to at least have an idea of how I can get out there in all these different environments, because Washington has it all. Like, we have the beaches, we have the mountains, we have desert, we have snow, we have forest. It's truly an incredible state. And you could never explore it all in a lifetime, but I'm going to try do as much as I can. I think that, seeing other people do it and, realizing that, yes, this is what a human is capable of, you can work towards that was really inspiring to me. And I've done a complete 180. I like nature now, and I'll put up with, sneezing a bit to be out in the pollen, the trees.
Yep. That's great. I love that. That's awesome. And I think I really like how you both brought up books, because I think that that's something that a lot of people don't think about. A lot of people think that, oh, well, you're an adventurer, so you must be this extreme athlete. You must skydive or base jump, or, sports like rock climbing and downhill skiing are in a lot of situations considered extreme sports. But the books, where do you think a lot of these authors get their motivation? There are so many authors that will go out there and they'll go on a hike, or they'll go on a walk. They'll even go on a walk through a wooded portion of a neighborhood. And all of a sudden, the pieces of the puzzle start to fit themselves together in their head. And they think about, oh, this is an adventure novel. I mean, this is it. So I like how you guys both brought up books. What I really loved and appreciated the most is that clearly from both of your different stories, you came from different roots, and yet it brought you both together as people who adventure together. And I think that that's one of the biggest points that I want to have people realize while listening to this podcast is that no matter what your route is, no matter when you start adventuring, you might start this adventure after listening to this podcast, but it's something. Every route creates a foundation, and it allows you to go pursue the adventure that you want to pursue. And I think that that's absolutely fantastic. And so the last question that I'll ask you guys before I'll stop recording is, what would you say to people who are nervous to start adventuring or haven't really thought of the motivation on why they should start adventuring? And how would you advocate for those people to get out there and enjoy what this world has to offer?
I would honestly say that people should start small if they're new to this sort of thing. They should be aware of their own comfort and skill level and start with something easy. An adventure can be as something small or something as small as like walking around a pond or walking in your local park, or even like going somewhere new in general, trying a new restaurant, going to a new city, really anything. You don't have to be hiking the PCT to have an adventure. It's really not that hard. So I think people should just start small and then go from there, It doesn't have to be some big, grand effort, It can be something really simple.
I love that. And I just think that the fact that you brought up starting small is so important. You don't have to go out and summit Mount Everest to be considered an adventurer. And I love that you brought up it could literally be just trying a new restaurant down the street or something like that, because starting small makes it easier to open it to everyone, because not everyone can afford to do all these different kinds of adventure. And we don't want anyone to feel left out of this community. So I really, really liked that answer of starting small. Thank you.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think also something that I've come to realize after I started very small. I've never been an athletic person naturally, so I've had to work towards being more comfortable doing different things. I think mentality has a big part in it. Whether it's going on a hike by yourself for the first time. I know that was nerve-wracking for me, but it's this mental idea that you are capable of doing it, and obviously you know your limits. It's always not great to see when people go out on these trails or go someplace that they don't know much about, and they get stuck. They don't do the research. They're not prepared to do that type of thing yet. But starting small is the key, because a lot of the people that I know I'm inspired by, they didn't, start being these super athletes or, living out in the woods for 100 days. Like, everyone starts somewhere. And I think that starting small, it really is a key. I think Danielle put it really well. But also, having that idea that you can do just about anything you want. You put in the work and you can. So I would say know your limits, but also know what's possible, because you never know. I've seen people that have gone from never stepping on a trail in their life to, summiting Rainier. Like, you can do it. It's just taking your time with it and learning all you can and enjoying it while you can. Because, even the small adventures can be just as memorable and as fun as the big ones.
Man, and these answers they're awesome. And they're giving me chills just hearing them, because I think, just starting small is everything. And I love that example, because you're totally right. There are people who have never put on a hiking boot, and 2 years later, they set a goal in mind to say, I'm going to summit Mount Rainier. and I'm going to get there. And they have people that keep them accountable. They have a training plan. And, these people might not have started off as these super athletes who have summited 12 mountains all around the world. It all starts with one small goal. And that's the beauty of adventure, is it can start with this super, super small idea and continue to expand. And I love that you guys have been able to touch on that with your photography. I love that you've been able to touch on that in all of your adventure stories, is regardless of where you start, it can take thousands of different directions.
Another fantastic guest and more storytelling on the definition of adventure. We'll be back on the next episode of the Heart of Adventure podcast. I look forward to you all tuning in again next time. Thanks.